Hi, welcome to Advanced JavaScript, and today we're going to be covering objects. So first we're going to do some review, and then we're going to introduce cookie clicker and objects, and make sure to follow along with this lesson with your own project on Khan Academy. So for some review questions, first we have, what function do we call to create animations? So you might remember from intermediate or beginning that we use the draw function, which will update every single frame so that we can make moving pictures and animations. The next question is, what variable represents the x and y of your mouse? This is mouse x and mouse y, so it's a bit easy to remember. But if you don't remember, you can always look at the Khan Academy JavaScript documentation when you scroll down in your Khan Academy project. The next question is, how do you check if a key is being pressed? And this one is you use an if statement and you use the key is pressed boolean, which will return either true or false. And the next question is a bit open-ended. So what do we use a variable for? We use a variable to store data, and it can be words, numbers, letters, anything you want pretty much. And then we have some shapes. So this you also might need a bit of a refresher on from the previous lessons. We have rectangles with x, y, width, and height, and the same with ellipses. And then for triangles, you want to define each of the 3 points in your triangle, and that will draw the triangle. So triangles can be a bit confusing, but you can adjust it as you go. So today we're going to be making our own version of Cookie Clicker, and by the end of the sessions you'll have something like this. So you have Cookie Clicker, and here I can click the cookie and the amount of cookies will go up, and now I have 24 cookies, and I can buy another clicker for 15 cookies, and now every time I click it'll go up by 2 cookies. And then there's other upgrades and things you can add later throughout the project. And for the day 1 goal, we're just going to be drawing a cookie for our game and learn about objects. So the first step is to create a new program. So go to this link, or you can type it out and name your program and click save, and then change the width and height to 600 and 600, which will give you a larger screen size. Now we're going to do a bit of coordinate plane review. So you should remember that in the very top left corner is 0, 0, and the bottom right corner is 600, 600. So now we're going to move into learning about objects. So an object is a data type that stores multiple properties in a variable, and it can help organize code by grouping related functions and data. So for an example, we have a cat object with properties like fur color, eye shape, and functions like behavior, or a song object with properties like title, length, genre, and functions like playing the song. So how do we create objects? So you set var object name equals, and then you have 2 empty curly brackets, and inside of your curly brackets you're going to define all of your properties. So when you define your properties inside of your object, you want to use colons and commas instead of like the traditional equal sign and semicolon. So it's a bit confusing, but just remember to do that when you're defining stuff inside of an object. So here we have Lizzie the cat as an object, and then we have different properties like age, fur color, likes, and then you can even have a function like the speak function that will say meow. So you can see the properties can be different data types like numbers, lists, strings. Um, so how do we access these properties? Um, you can use the dot notation. You can also use the bracket notation, but generally it's a bit easier to use the dot notation. So you do object name dot property name. For example, you could do Lizzie the cat dot age. And to modify the properties, you can do object name dot property name equals a new value, or object name dot new property name equals a new value to add a new property outside of the object definition. And you can also delete object properties, but it's not really necessary to delete object properties since you can kind of like just not use them. So next, defining the cookie object. So you can think about what properties and functions should a cookie object have. So a cat has like age, fur color. What are like the defining features of a cookie? So maybe like size, color, the X and Y coordinates. And then for our cookie clicker game, we want cookies per click and cookies per second. And then it's also useful to have a function that will tell us if our mouse is inside of the cookie. So now you want to create a cookie object with these properties. And you can leave the isTouching function empty for now, and we'll go over that again later. And you can go to the previous point in the video where I show how to create an object if you need to remember the syntax. So the next step is drawing the cookie. So to draw the cookie, you create a draw cookie function, and you want the parameters to be x, y, and size. And this will draw the cookie using these parameters. And to do that, when you draw an ellipse, you want to use x, y, and then your width and height will be multiplied by size. And you can also, for the chocolate chips and things like that, you can do like x plus 20, y minus 40. So you can slightly adjust where the chocolate chips are. The next step is calling the cookie object. So you want to create the draw function and call draw cookie inside of it. And don't forget to call your background before that. And you want to pass in the cookie objects into your draw cookie call. So you would do something like draw cookie is first we have the x parameter here, and then y, and then size. So we'll pass in cookie.x, cookie.y, and cookie.size in the draw function. And then you want to save your project. So make sure to save this project since we're going to be using it for the rest of the sessions of the class. And then here we have the answer. So here you have your cookie object, and then we will make our draw cookie function, which will draw the cookie using x, y, and size as parameters. And you can see here how you can adjust based on these parameters. And then in your draw function, you want to call the background and then call the draw cookie function, and you'll use the cookie objects. So these are defined here, cookie.x, cookie.y, and cookie.size. You will use those as parameters to draw your cookie. So that's it for lesson 1 for advanced JavaScript.